Hi, I'm Liz.
And I'm Marie, and this is Mock It, a podcast from MetroStar, where we take a deep dive into UX design, trending design topics, and making our work transform the government. Let's get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Marie. Thanks for kicking us off. So today, this is episode 10, and we will be talking about design leadership. And we have a very special guest, Eva. How's it going? Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Do you want to take a second to introduce yourself?
Yeah. My name is Eva Hutson. I am the Senior Manager for Experience Strategy for the Health Business Unit at MetroStar. And I have been in the design field for about 7+ years. And I'm very excited to be here and chat with you about design leadership.
Awesome. Yeah, we're super stoked to have you here, get your expertise.
Yeah.
So we have a fun-filled episode of questions where we might seem like we're grilling you, but
when I looked at it, I was like, wow, that's a lot of questions.
Yeah, we're very pumped to get into it.
Excellent. I'm ready, I think.
So to kick us off and sort of do a baseline for this podcast, could you give us a brief introduction into what design leadership is and how you've seen it work its way up into the C-suite over the last few years?
Yeah, so design leadership is an interesting term in terms of a specific definition. I think it varies based on who you ask. And then I think that's something very common in the design world. If you ask somebody what's a UX designer, it depends on who you ask, right? So design leadership, I think, has a similar faith for better or worse. I personally like Jared Spool's definition of design leadership, which is roughly that as long as you have people who follow you, then you are a leader. So if you have, regardless of title, positioning, seniority, if you have people who find your ideas of value and want to follow your lead and your thought leadership, then you are a leader. And I think that that's a simple definition that cuts across any sort of organizational bureaucracy that may prevent people who want to be in leadership from feeling like they're in leadership because they don't have the right title.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that perspective, and that's kind of what I've adopted in my style and my perception of design leadership.
Yeah, it makes it more accessible. You don't have to be a leader because you have a title and you have direct reports, but anyone can be a leader.
Yeah.
And contribute.
And Jared talks a lot about how being a manager and having a title that may be associated with leadership does not automatically make you a leader.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've had experiences where you've worked under or with people who have titles or have been in position of seniority where you didn't feel like you want to follow them. You just didn't feel like that's somebody that you agree with or somebody that can benefit you in your career.
Mm-hmm.
It's just leadership doesn't come with a title. It's more of a soft power, more organic than something that you're just given in a way. And it's also something you grow into over time. So it's not, it doesn't come with a promotion or years of experience.
Cool. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, this is like skipping around a little bit from one of the questions. This is a perfect segue. What you just said. If you don't mind telling us the first time that you felt like a leader in your career within the UX field.
Excellent question. When did I first feel like a leader? I think it was in a position I had about 5-ish years ago, where I sort of self-initiated a brown bag exercise for across the organization that I was working at to educate people on human-centered design in UX. The challenge I was seeing was that the people we were working with who were outside of the digital team weren't fully understanding why do they need a UX person? What is the UX role? They hear the term human-centered design, but they didn't really understand how that applies to them. Like, there was essentially an artificial divide between the digital team and the rest of the organization. And I wanted to bridge that. And so I started these brown bags during lunchtime, where it was sort of like a free, open forum, one-on-one conversation. I invited the whole organization. So folks who were interested in learning more came to the event. And over time, the event sort of became popular. People started talking to each other about them. And I guess I grew a following. And I was,
Nice.
build a name for myself. So in that way, I think that was the first time where I felt like I better be careful about what I say, because people are actually listening. And that's it's an exciting thing, but it's also a big responsibility.
So historically, designers have struggled to get a seat at the decision making. Liz is like looking at me. Great. For those of you who haven't listened to our podcast, I am also a designer. Recently have been promoted to design team manager. But yeah, so historically, and I have felt this through my career, of how do you get to the table where the decisions are being made?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you've seen it incorporated, the designers getting there.
Yeah. So the table where decisions are being made is an interesting concept.
Now
Because
it's like the phone call, right? Being
right, we don't
virtual.
really have tables
No
right
tables now.
I suppose you have a table at home, but you're kind of by yourself. So the Zoom link on which decisions get made, we're going to cut off Zoom. The online platform meeting
Conference.
link. Yeah. So it's really been a journey, I think. And we covered some of these topics on DC Design Week.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a really good conversation with not just designers, but also developers and project managers. And I think that was particularly effective, because I think the way designers get a seat at the table is when they're perceived as valuable as developers and PMs, and build these relationships with other team members in a cross-functional team, where it's not a power dynamic where designers execute a vision that comes from leadership or the PM or the client. They are an integral part of facilitating the conversation around what the vision should be, and are the person or the team that owns the vision in terms of creating assets that communicate that vision and align the team throughout the stages of development and design back to that vision. So I think that when companies start realizing that the power that designers have in that role of being like the owner and facilitator of the vision, rather than just executing like actual visuals and graphic design,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's when they're perceived as equal parts to PMs and developers, and as important, if not even more important, than those roles. So for that to happen, I think designers need to do a lot of legwork ahead of time. We talk about empathy a lot, and honestly, the best way to get a seat at that table is to empathize with what the rest of the team is going through and why they may or may not think to involve you in these decisions, because it may not be that they intentionally choose to ignore you. It may be that they don't understand what you do to know to invite you, right, to these conversations. So the onus is on us to educate people about what we do, educate ourselves about what they do, and try to speak a language in which like we can have compelling messages to people who are not designers to understand why we should be involved in whatever their world is. So it's a complicated process, I guess, but there's no easy one step, here's how you get to the decision-making table kind of recipe, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's again, to reiterate, it's really educating yourself, educating the rest of your team, and empathizing with the rest of your team to really understand how you can best provide value.
Yeah, I think the education rate is really good. And so that means as designers, right, you have to be able to communicate not only your design and why you did something, but maybe as well as like presenting an alternative design, or hey, I heard you and I've done it. Because if you're in a very like strict area, say it's really prescribed and they're seeing you as like the production line, and some like I started out there at one point, you can get out of it and become more of a leadership role, but it is not just setting off the, oh, here it is, I did it just as you did it, you said to do it. It's like, hey, can we have a quick chat? I've made your updates, and it also sparked some other things of consideration, which I think is a helpful indirect way of doing the education for them, because then they can see that you're being thoughtful and not just taking direction, like a 1-for-1, right? You thought about it.
Yeah, and that thoughtfulness and that being proactive in delivering extra value beyond what they asked you. You know, you went beyond the minimal requirement that you had.
Yeah.
Those types of actions are signals to others that, you know, you're ready to take the next level, and you want to, you know, push the understanding of what your role should be and like get to the next level. Absolutely.
So I really enjoy this because I get to be sit between the two design gurus here. Yeah, I love this, and I think on our project there. So you are you are like our design manager, like you really lead the team on that, and then like my role is more trying to do some more of like the project management stuff and go sort of that route. And I think that like the empathizing that you were discussing, like there would have been tons of times that maybe our two roles would have been like in competition or in conflict or something, but we just like took that out of it, and we're like, we're in this together. Like we just like built upon like that back and forth of like not 1-to-1, but like here's your idea, here's my idea, like here's how we can like merge them, and then here's like our idea of like that has like a little something extra that we can bring to the developers or something like that. And so that's been how we've handled it on our, at least like I have a really like positive like interpret like how we've handled our sort of various roles on our project. But in your experience, and I think in everyone's experience, sometimes conflict does come up, and it's not as, you know, we make it look really smooth at this point because we've been working together for so long, and like it's just like natural now. But there, do you have any like tips or tricks on sort of approaching any conflict that comes up between some of these roles that,
or even resistance, right? Because it's an education on like, right, getting folks to buy in you should have a UX team, and now like treating them as like, oh, they are thoughtful, they can help with the vision.
I think in your example I think it's a good example of, because you're in the PM role now, and
getting there.
I mean, your title has PM in it. And by PM I mean project manager. And I think your background in content and design has enabled you to have at least if not a good understanding and appreciation for human-centered design and the process and what Marie is leading. I don't think we had to sell you on the value of human-centered design in any way.
No, right? Like my master's was in that, so like that's like, you know, like I just like the design, and I always say this, like I feel like you think in design, and like that is like a skill that like you could have the most academic knowledge of like X, Y, or Z, but you're just like, that's just like not your skill set. And it's just like amazing like how these teams come together, and like there's so much like constructive thinking that goes into like building a design. I think sometimes designers don't get the credit they deserve because it's like, oh, you made something look pretty, and you're like, no, like there's like hypothesis driven design, there's human centered design, there's like all of these things that go into it that like my design looks great, but it wasn't because because
I picked the right colors or the right fonts. That helps, but there were other decisions made.
Right. I mean, we can go into like what is really the definition of design, right? And I think that's fundamentally a big challenge in explaining what we do, because the connotation to visual design is so strong.
Yeah.
But in reality, a design is, you know, just intentional choices that shape experiences, right? So that doesn't have to be just the interface. It has to do with like flows, service design, even staffing is part of it. If you're designing an organization or a service, how you do the staffing modeling is part of design. So I think it's, again, with the education piece, we need to promote more of like what all is encompassed under that term, and just kind of break the visual design connotation as much as possible. I actually have heard the argument that human-centered designers and people who follow those principles or practice, design thinking methodologies should move away from the word design because it's so strong. And I think we can have a full episode on like, is that a good idea? I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I don't have a clear answer. But to go back to your original question, how do you handle conflict? It really, I think, to me, boils down to relationship building and being able to have more allies than enemies, if you think of it in very black and white terms. When you go into an organization, if you're new or if you're starting a new project with a new team, I think one mistake that designers make is go in without much humility, kind of going in as like everybody's, if you don't understand what I do, then that's your problem. And if you don't understand why UX is so important, then like you don't know anything about IT. That kind of attitude is not helpful. I feel like the way you go around building trust and leadership, going back to leadership, is through humility and empathy and leveling with people, meeting them where they are. I think designers are really good at talking about, empathizing with the user and, doing research to see where the users are and doing contextual inquiries to understand their environment. And we do that very seldomly in our like project day-to-day work. I don't know many designers who, when they start a new team, do the due diligence to understand who everybody on their team is, what are their needs, what are their motivations, why are they thinking the way they are, what is their background that informs whether or not they're going to push back on design or not. Like I've had examples with developers who only worked with print designers in the back, but in their history. Had I not known that, we might have like butted heads because I would have pushed them beyond what they're capable of understanding at this time. So I had to like do some education and then have more advanced conversations with them. And that these are, again, nothing is simple. It takes time, but these are the ways in which you can effectively avoid conflict and build allies rather than enemies.
Nice.
I think that we've been really lucky on our project that our PM always says that the UX is like it's like the cherry on top. That's not the exact phrasing, but
luxury. Luxury. It's like it's luxury because it's a newer field, right? So when she was a developer and stuff, she didn't have UXers.
She was the UXer.
Yeah, she was. But she has fully embraced it and just loves, hanging in the background on the calls just to like learn more and listen more.
That's great. You guys have been able to like educate and quote unquote convert her into our world, which is great. I think it is really it's a difficult task and it's something to be celebrated, and I don't think we celebrate it enough because it's not like a deliverable, right? But if you think about it, how much it took to get somebody who doesn't have a good understanding of the value to somebody who's an advocate now and can push on our behalf, that's a huge win, and it's a really long process. So kudos to you all.
We've been really lucky.
She's very open to it. I think on our team we're also very open about not necessarily our constraints, but like she's always like, I'm a 1 and 0s person from being a developer, and like will always be like, I'm about to get really in the weeds. Like it is a well-known thing that I can not say high level, really like to get into the nitty-gritty of topics. But like our team's gotten really good, right? Because we don't have the nonverbals with being remote. we have our key phrases that we say to be like, I'm going to get in the weeds real quick and then we can come out of it. Or like, I'm just going to say this, or like, I'm be stuck here. Now that we need to talk about it, it's not appropriate right now. We'll pin it. But yeah, she's always like, okay, so explain this to me again. Cause right. And it's just,
but it seems like you use a language that works. Or
yeah.
at least, like, you're educated in the language that you're using to describe your work.
Yeah. We have our key phrases of when we know we need to explain something a little bit more, or like we're great, we move on to like continue that conversation at whatever level it's at.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of leadership, is people trusting you. And I think we don't talk about that enough in the design space. I don't think it's like, how do you build trust with everybody you work with? Like, even though people don't understand the full value or they haven't experienced it, if you just by nature of being like empathetic and personal with them, you build like trust and the capacity for them to blindly trust you, even if they don't understand what is it that you do. They just trust that you're doing the right thing, and that's really how you win. That's it. Exact leadership example. Yeah.
So I have a question that I think could apply to all of us and could be its own podcast topic, but
it's our little teasers, huh?
Yeah.
I'm writing down.
I know, right? Rachel, our producer. Yeah. So how, I think this is, I will first ask you this question, but I think any of us can answer it. So how has being a woman played into being a leader in your role? Not a small, just a small question. Like,
okay, feminism in design. That's a whole nother podcast. Yeah. It's a good question. It's an interesting question. It's a difficult one to answer in retrospect. So I will say, when I was starting in the field, I noticed that most individual contributors, or people who actually would do the executional work like wireframing, prototyping, etc., were mostly women. And creative directors, art directors were mostly men. And just by the nature of the work, there's more individual contributors than there are art directors. So the majority of the field is female. However, the leadership layer is mostly male. So I noticed that early on in my career, a lot of jobs that I had were like led by by men. And it kind of stunned me in a way that kind of made me question, like, can I actually be in those positions eventually? I didn't have a lot of examples of women who were in leadership positions in design. Yeah. I still don't know that many women who are like chief design officers or chief experience officers. And again, the field is I need to find a quote on that, but last time I checked, it was, in terms of individual contributors, like female dominated. And I think it can be disheartening, but I've been fortunate to, first off, be privileged to be white. That's a big deal. And also have mentors who have kind of put me in a place where I didn't feel like they were judging me because of I'm a woman. They kind of put me in the mental place and in this like psychologically safe space to not even consider my gender, to just keep focusing on the quality of my work. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I strive as a person in power, some level of power, I suppose. I strive to do that for the people who I work with, who are early career folks. I want them to not think about their demographics if they can, or like their identity and however they self-identify, to focus on the quality of the work and their character first and foremost, so they don't get disheartened by what they're seeing as examples. And it's not an easy thing to do, and I don't know that I'm particularly successful at it, but it's my a goal I have.
Nice. I think that makes a lot of sense, right? That it's the
socioeconomic.
No, the safe space. What was your?
Psychological safety.
There you go. Yeah, that you're creating psychologically safe spaces right, in a time when it's not diverse up in the leadership level. So,
and I mean, I feel like we can't talk about identity as just gender, right? People have the cross-sectionality of identity is hugely important, and diversity comes in many shapes and forms. And as far as I can tell, leadership still looks the same. It's like mostly men, and I'm guessing mostly white, but I haven't looked at the data. So we just, we have to keep moving the needle forward. There's a lot of, I guess, lip service to, like, for lack of a better word, it's somewhat popular now to talk about diversity and inclusion, but I'm not seeing a lot of it in practice. I think people like to talk about it, but I don't know that I'm seeing a lot of conscious decisions about diverse people being promoted, diverse people being hired, and companies, walking the talk.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah. We've had an episode about it, and even both right from like the human resources aspect, which is very important, but also like the culture or like forms that you come across. Like that's another place to start at, like of just all the different touch points that you could really touch on being more diverse, more inclusive. I would agree with you, right? It's still very, they haven't been updated.
Yeah. And again, like since I've been at MetroStar, I've been on one project, and I've had my two PMs that I work with on a daily basis. They are like, they are very inclusive. They're very much about diversity. And also one of our PMs is a female who she is all about making sure that like she pumps you up. She pumps everyone up on the team, but also like having a woman to look up to is just like, she's just like a powerhouse. Like, and it's like someone that you can be like, oh, that is like an example. I can be like that too. Yeah. And so like, it's been vital for me to see someone who is just like owns the room, and it's like,
and is your advocate, and
having good role models is absolutely fundamental to like how you perceive yourself and your future. Like when you see it, you're like, yes, that. Otherwise, it's difficult to just imagine yourself being somebody you have nothing in common with.
Yeah. Well, I think that we condensed a full podcast into a good few minutes. So thanks for everyone's vulnerability with that one. I know that can be a hard one. What would you say are some skills that a designer should have or should learn to embark on a leadership path?
I should have prepared. I had these questions. No, I'm kidding. This is another one that could be its own podcast. But I would say the most important skills are largely people skills, and followed closely by business acumen, understanding how your organization makes money, because we live in a capitalist society. At the end of the day, organizations need to move forward and grow. And these are forces that if you choose to ignore as a designer, we're probably not going to be very successful as designers. We're not going to be very successful. So I would say people skills being number one. And what I mean by people skills is, educating yourself on what is, for example, psychological safety. How do you make sure that the people that make your team are positioned as best as possible to be successful, to execute their craft, to be productive, to feel valuable as part of a larger vision, larger group. Learning about group dynamics. You had an episode on norming, storming, performing.
Yes, yeah.
Learning, so knowing these things is absolutely important to leading others, to making sense of change in team dynamics. So self-education is key, because I know they didn't used to teach that in design school. That's something that you constantly have to self-teach yourself. And yeah, the second thing being business acumen, understanding what your executives are interested in, what are their perspectives and objectives, and what do they expect from you or your team in terms of business growth. These are things, again, that you don't learn in design school, but are absolutely paramount to success as a leader.
Yeah, I think I really liked when you mentioned earlier about, right, we do all this building empathy for our users and finding out their needs and goals, right? We didn't learn the leadership part in design, but there are skills in our toolbox that we can do, right? Like if I'm taking on a leadership role because, right, I want to help people grow, or right, I want to grow into that, just finding out what individuals on my teams, their needs, their goals, or you highlighted why a developer is pushing back on something, right? Because people don't wake up in the morning or like, I'm going to be a blocker today, right? There's more to it than like, and you can just hear like, oh man, someone's pushing back. Like, why is that? And so we should take all that interest that we have in what we want to develop for our users and empathy and take it to our teammates as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that you've really worked hard on that skill, because like I noticed like for like different teammates, like you talk to them differently based on like their skill level. Like for instance, like on our UX team, I did not go to design school. So you and some of our other UX designers and architects can have a conversation about like design theory. And I am like, what is going on? But then like Marie will like circle back with me and be like, and like really like explain it as like a novice would. Yeah. So you definitely like, I think you like really work hard at making sure that there is that like empathy for people who may not be at the same level, which I appreciate. Yeah. So cool. Well, to wrap up this question with some of the cross functionality and sort of this empathy, why do you think designers should invest in this emotional intelligence? Like why is this so important?
I think unless you are you have the emotional intelligence to be self-aware and understand your shortcomings, it's difficult to be able to empathize with others. I think if you don't have the realizations that you're not perfect, not everything you do is the best thing ever, and constantly check yourself about biases that you may have, or mistakes that you've made, and how do you not make them again, kind of having like internal retros that's good one. With yourself. I think that level of personal retrospection and personal growth kind of enables the rest of the team to look at you going through this and kind of use you as an example as a leader on how they can improve and do better. So I think it's really impossible to be a leader, going back to the definition of a leader being a soft skill that you can't just impose on somebody. I really think it's impossible to be a leader if you're not compassionate and self-aware, because I think nobody is inspired by egocentric, people who are just there for themselves, and like we call them the heroes, right? Like the people that always know it all, right? Nobody's inspired by that, and it's not effective long term, and it doesn't lead to creativity and all the good things that we're going for as a designer community.
Nice.
Cool. Yeah. And then I have two sort of wrap up questions for you as we take you out of the hot seat a little bit. So during this podcast, you've mentioned that sometimes the government does lag in this particular field. Can you talk a bit about where you feel the future of design leadership in government is and where it's going?
I think the future of design leadership in government is very bright. I think it's an up and coming skill set that is yet to be realized, that has yet to realize its full potential in the government space. I've seen clients having so many more aha moments in the last 2 years than I have in the prior 5 or 6. I think the community, the design community in the federal space has done an excellent job to promote the value and to showcase the value of design. At the end of the day, the proof's in the pudding. So when we continuously deliver good work using human-centered design, that brings to more work, and then people pay attention, they notice, and other agencies I've had specific examples of an agency look at something we created for another agency and literally reach out to us and say, we want that, make that for us. And that was the product of a lot of research and iteration and ideation that we did at MetroStar. And that is how I think we shift the culture, is like when you actually show the outcomes that our customers are interested in and making it replicable and scaling all of our practices to be able to support their missions. And I think we're positioned very well to do that at MetroStar.
So what advice do you have for future designers that are looking to get into design, first in the industry and then like a design specific role?
Your portfolio is not as important as you think it is.
We were just saying that earlier today.
Yeah.
Some validation.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's it. That's another culture shift that we're experiencing as a design community, because I think the value of our work, again, it comes with the whole leadership growth of our industry in general. The value of design skill sets is moving from visual design to facilitation, strategy, and team leadership. And you can't necessarily showcase that in a portfolio, a traditional design portfolio. Now, it's not like the portfolios don't have value. You can describe case studies and, describe specifically how you made decisions that impacted the bottom line. These are all good things to document for yourself. But I think the traditional perspective or perception is a portfolio is about your visual skills, and that is less and less important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely more like critical thinking, problem solving.
Thinking.
Yeah.
Have you facilitated workshops? How did that go? What did you learn? These are more important things to me as a hiring manager than how good are your sketch skills or design software skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that was our last question for you. We wanted to take a second and thank you
for coming on.
This has been great. Thank you so much.
This is Mock It. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends, and join us next time. As always, if you're interested in learning more about how government and tech collide, visit metrostar.com and follow us on our socials.